Hi everyone. I thought rather than typing up an email around the questions and comments that you guys placed on the session 7 site, the project management site, I'd rather just do this video and hopefully that will be a way that will be better to explain and kind of try and answer all your questions. So the comments and questions were both, they were on the voice thread, there were comments and questions. And then the forum discussion, there was quite an active discussion around project risk management, which was more comments than question. So those two elements. So if I go to the voice thread and just formally go there and show you the questions. Okay, so that is the voice thread. Mine may look a bit more different to yours because I'm in the educator view. So if you go through that, you can also go back to the voice thread and look at the questions. Okay, there was a question by Tyler, and I actually have it on a Word document, which I'll come back to now. So there was a question over there at the constraints, and then there were several questions and comments around the constraints as well in this slide, which I've also made a copy of, and I'll talk to that shortly. So I appreciate your comments and questions. They're always very valuable for the people that ask the questions, but also for the rest of the class. I think those were the only questions around the constraints. Yeah, that was the end of that. So, and then the voice thread, project management week 7. The discussion was around project risk management and related. So there, as I mentioned, there was quite a rich discussion around this, so I appreciate that, and hopefully all the students, even if I didn't comment or question here, had a chance to look at your contributions. They're very valuable contributions, and they also speak to your practical experience, which I think is great. And that's really the forum. A forum discussion is a forum where this sort of rich exchange can happen, and you can learn from that. So I appreciate all that. So just to give an overall context of project management, let me for a moment just go to the textbook. So in a textbook on page, page 315 of Verba, there's the project management process of, they define 15 steps here. So the overall comment I want to make about the constraints and the difficulty to manage and the risks and so on is that if as a project manager you follow very specifically such a process, you will manage, you will probably be in a better position to manage risk. You're probably in a better position to get a project to be successful. So I think this is the first piece of advice I can offer you, sort of an understanding of this. And the other understanding is to get support for a project and to then communicate with all stakeholders. Okay, so those are very important elements. And then the other element I think that comes into any kind of project is you have a project plan, you go through all the planning phases and so on, but as you step into actually delivering on the project, you will find things happen some of those risks you may have got in your project risk management profile may materialize sooner or later. Then you need to manage that. And you also then, within the broader context, may need to be flexible and then discuss that flexibility with the necessary people that needed to buy in and that support the project. Of course, you want to implement the project plan as is, but there may be elements of it that you need to flex to have the project done, finish the project successfully. So I think communication is very, very important around the project management process, and then proper planning, and then and then risk management is part of the planning. Develop a risk management kind of plan, so that's the planning from a textbook point of view. And then what I wanted to share with you is you may or may not be aware that the project management field, there's an international professional qualification that you can earn in project management, and it's a very rigorous learning process and professional examinations and that sort of thing. And what that the Project Management Institute that offers this qualification have developed over time a record of all the best practices, so to speak, my words, around what do you do when you manage a project and all the documents and the processes and that sort of thing. And what they have published over several years, I don't know how long ago, how far back it goes, probably 10, 20 years, I'm not sure. But the 2017 rather version of the document, the document is called The Guide to the Project Management Body of Knowledge, also known as PMBOK Guide. This was the 6th edition in 2017. But I wanted to give you a flavor of, this is 579 pages of body of knowledge of various processes and documents, as I said, templates and so on, that is in there. You can see there on this electronic copy how detailed it is. And I want to make a point which I'll come to just now. So there are all sorts, and the textbook have obviously simplified all of this for the nature of the target audience for the textbook, which would be introductory. This is the expert level, getting to grips with this whole project management body of knowledge. So there's a lot of information around and guidelines around how to manage projects. So you can see I'm scrolling and it just continues, and then I'll just go into the various defined activities, data flow diagram, and all sorts of project management body of knowledge elements. So the point I want to make now is that there is a thing like project management maturity, where organizations may be very immature as far as projects are concerned, and they don't have much of this expertise in their system systemized. And then you can have companies that are extremely mature in terms of project management, and they've gone through various phases to get to that maturity, and they would be very expert at managing projects aligned with all of these body of knowledge elements. And the other point I want to make is in terms of kind of related to the maturity as well, is that our perspective for this module is really to give you an introductory feel for project management and to sensitize you to the overall process and kind of the important things like stakeholder management and so on, and the planning, of course, and and so on, monitoring the constraints and so on, so that you would be able as a HR person to manage a not a very complex project, but you could make a contribution and even be perhaps a project manager for such a, call it an entry-level project. Some of you may be more experienced with projects, but our focus is on the, basically in entry level for this module, introducing you to the subject with one session devoted to it. So overall, then you have large organizations like I worked for Shell Petroleum Oil many years ago in one of their businesses, and they as an organization, I think they were very mature around projects, and they had all sorts of guidelines and so on and so forth, which were aligned to this body of knowledge. But you can imagine that as such a big organization with, I don't know, 40, 50,000 people worldwide and billions of dollars of revenue and so on and so forth. And they need to have a certain level of process and procedure and formality around project management. So that's the one extreme. The other extreme is where you have let's say a startup or a small company that the one example one of the students gave is where she ran a franchise, and that franchise don't need to have all these things in place because you don't have the capacity in terms of people to execute all these documents, and it's not really necessary for the projects that the franchise might have been involved in or will be involved in. That is not to say that the franchisee cannot benefit from project management skills, but they don't need to, complete millions of documents and so on. They must have the skills to be able to implement project or to design and plan projects for that particular organization. You're not going to go worldwide or anything like that with your projects, or got a 2-year system change project. So hopefully the point is clear. Depending on the size of the organization, the formality will differ. But the bottom line is you still have to do planning, you still have to do risk management. Again, you maybe are not as formalized with that. Your plan may be a 2-page memo to the head of the franchise, and you will manage according to that to kind of maybe overstate the point. So then in terms of the questions in the voice thread, let me just go there. And where is that? So here, this one. So Tyler asked a question around the constraints therefore depend on a project at hand, and would these constraints affect every aspect of the project, only those aspects pertaining to the 6 constraints previously mentioned? And that's the first comment I saw, and I actually typed up an answer. I think I actually posted it in a voice thread as well, so let me share that one with you. So what I said is each project will be unique, although a project manager brings to the table their experience on all types of projects that they have been doing in the past, and they probably have had an experience in a similar project as the one in question. And just pause there for a moment. So this project manager may have been, and the team that's under that project manager may have had various types of projects that they were involved in, and they bring that experience to the table. And this is now kind of maybe a larger type of organization. But each project is still unique. So you can have a system implementation, let's say implementing a software program to manage customer relations, to keep track of customers' data and send them birthday wishes and know what their desires are and so on. And that is a software implementation in terms of customer relations. And then you have a systems implementation, which is also software related. That would be, let's say, how to manage your debtors and that sort of software program. So there will be similarities in the 2 projects that focuses on a software implementation. But you can, I think, of course, see that the one will be relatively different to the other one in terms of who the stakeholders, the direct stakeholders are, what training, and probably even the duration of the implementation. Maybe the one is more complex than the other one, but there will be overlap. So, and then the general answer also to Tyler is, in general, everything affects everything in terms of his question of it depends on the project and would these constraints affect every aspect of the project. So my experience is that in general, everything affects everything. Remember, we are in organizations, whether it's for-profit or not for-profit, and these organizations are complex adaptive systems. And then people are within that organization, and because there are people and various relationships and everything, and we're affected by the environment, we are all complex adaptive systems to adapt to the environment that we are given. So the project then brings an environment into it, and it could affect everything within the project and beyond. And a certain constraint, although it may affect inverted commas everything, it will have a more direct impact on, let's say, a certain angle on a project, whereas in some other angles of the project it will have an impact but not as heavy. Yeah, so as I mentioned, so any one of the constraints must play out to some degree on any aspect of a project. And then I make the point here, the project manager must constantly manage and have in mind and have plans in place to manage in and around constraints. So having said that, the project management body of knowledge and the textbook planning process, depending on the size of the business, will depend the formality and the complexity of those management parts, and must just do proper planning and then managing the project with that proviso that things will change and you need to be flexible and think on your feet, but all within a plan. There must be a plan, and then communication. So then Donna noted that she understands that a project manager has to consider all of these elements when planning, managing a project. I'm assuming the elements, it was under the constraints slide, so it will be the constraints. But is it realistically possible to fully consider every element? And then the point is made, I also understand that unexpected risk would come from the inability to consider every element, but is there a gap understanding of this? So again, you know, the kind of my best answer, I think, will be that if you do the planning properly and you've considered things that could go wrong, which would be risks, and you've consulted with various people related to the project stakeholders, and your project team must contribute, maybe you will miss something, and that is then where you have to think on your feet and make sure that you communicate the issue to everyone involved, and as soon as possible make amends or mitigate the typical issue. So realistically possible to fully consider every element. I think you can list those constraints and then take them one by one and think with your people, brainstorm, etc., what might be an issue around each of those theoretical constraints, and then work through that systematically. And you know, if you do that very effectively, what else can you really do? Again, I come back to then things may happen that was a little bit further off your radar than those on the project list, on the risk list rather, and then you must manage that. And I think there would be an understanding of that things may have happened that wasn't foreseen and wasn't realistic to foreseen, and no one could have foreseen it. So the people that are in power, rather than sinking your project and firing you, if you've kept them up to date and had them on board all the time, then you can manage that. So I think there will be an understanding to a certain degree. But if something happens and it is clear that the project management role wasn't really fulfilled effectively, then the person will be taken to task and maybe will in future be given smaller projects to build up to a level of expertise that maybe would be needed for maybe this particular project that didn't go well. I hope I've understood your question completely. Yeah, so the bottom line is plan and then execute and manage. And then you will also continuously review your risk plan. So that is also another way that you would pick up issues. And a project manager with her team needs to be in touch with everything that happens and meet regularly and so on. And again, where Shell Global may have very rigid sort of processes around meetings in a smaller company, a 5-person, let's say, company, it would be more informal, but you still have to execute the core processes in terms of planning and managing. So then Shireen makes the comment here, I was wondering the same thing around what we just discussed. And I think, yeah, it's sort of part of what I answered as well. I think it's not always possible to be in control of all these elements at all times. But I think with proper planning and risk management, you are able to eliminate the bigger risk or factors that can influence your projects on a large scale. So this is really aligned, or I'm aligned with what Shireen has noted here. And then also, I think we're aligned in what we said. Small bumps, however, are impossible to avoid, especially when you encounter a new project or one you're not familiar with. So that's also a valid point. And then if you're not familiar with a specific project, it is very important that you actually do touch on people that may have been involved with that, or even co-op people onto the project as a project team member that maybe have expertise in a particular field, which might create a risk, but they're not the fully fledged project manager, but you bring them on as an expert, let's say, and they can help you and the rest of the team to be informed about specific issues in a specific area that might create a small bump or even larger ones. And then, Angela, you mentioned here, you were also curious about this issue that discussed above with Donna and Shireen. So you're saying you're also curious about this in terms of planning involved in practice. And also I would like to ask to what extent HR is actively involved with project management or are part of this team? Question mark. At times HR feels separate and other times they need to be involved. The overlap for me needs some demystification. So I think my best answer could be that I'm thinking of projects. I would say that if it's let's say it's an HR related project, implementing a new human resource information system, piece of software that maybe is an upgrade to an old one, or maybe the company has been manual all along and now needs to upgrade that. You'll have a professional or a qualified project manager maybe coming in, depending on the size of the organization, to manage that. So this project manager, again, depending on the size of the organization, will take control of the project, and then you'll have project team members, and there might be even more than one HR person on that project team that is allocated to the project, and then there will be involvement. But insofar as projects are concerned, any project, let's say again we take Shell Global as an example. The projects are run by project managers, and the teams are, you've got various people of various expertise, And to the extent that people are involved in managing projects, there will be an HR component in terms of managing issues. So I think that in that context, HR could be involved. It depends again, maybe, in terms of what type of project it is. And so, for example, let's say it's a big software implementation like SAP, a SAP system in a very large organization. Your HR person will more than likely sit on the team and ensure that the training for the people to learn about the new system will be executed as part of the project plan elements. One or more of the tasks on the project in the project plan, and then the person will be a formal part of the project. So, yeah, I don't know what else to really say. Also, I would like to ask whether it's active involved for project management or part of this team. Yeah, HR feels separate. I think so. If there's a need for in a project for people, for HR to be involved, otherwise there may be a risk to the project, and the project manager ignores that or basically don't take that into consideration, that will create a problem for the project. So I think for HR, for project managers, they need to also take into account that they need to consider the full business and all the support departments. For example, finance and marketing could be involved, and so on. But yeah, HR feels separate, and other times they need to be involved. Yes, I agree with you. And the overlap for me needs some demystification. So let me maybe repeat, apology for that, is that the overlap for me needs some demystification. So again, some projects may require more HR involvement depending on the nature of the project. Maybe one example would be, I'm also an educator on the organizational development 1 module, for the organization development 1 module. And organizational development is expertise that runs projects in organization to change the organization by the very name of the organizational development title. And it would be, normally that would have a start and an end date. So they would implement interventions, and then no doubt you will have to have HR on board in running that specific project. Whereas, let's say you're implementing a new factory machine setup, HR will probably need to be consulted in terms of people training and so on, but it wouldn't be as intensive as the organizational development project and those associated interventions. So I'm not sure exactly how else to really comment on that. So maybe if you still need to have a little bit more thinking on that, and I can perhaps try and say a little bit more about that, please let me know. So hopefully this was useful, and yeah, I think I must just sign off with the point again and emphasizing it that the size of the organization dictates the formality. And if it's a project that can be run in actually just a department, so the HR department may have a project that they want to run implementing a new onboarding system or process. So they need to design and all that, this and what will we do when. HR person can probably handle that with the support of some other people, but you could probably run that in-house and just make sure finance knows about the financial implications and so on. So in terms of this module, your role, as I mentioned, you could in fact get involved with that sort of project and have an understanding of the importance of the project management process, and then be fairly successful either as a project manager, and maybe you would have had in some experience in HR for several years, and would be easily co-opted as project manager, or initially you may be a project team member with a certain task, and that's how you will pick up information, expertise. Hopefully this is useful.